Andy Borowitz is an award-winning comedian, New York Times bestselling author. His newest book is Profiles in Ignorance: How America's Politicians Got Dumb and Dumber. And now he has one of the most popular pages on Substack. Andy Borowitz, thanks for taking the time today. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me, Scott. And it's great to be on Substack with you.
Hey, it's a better community. You can This is not an ad for it, I promise, but we I like being able to manage the page and have some kind of filter where it's not just trolls overtaking like our friends at X they've kind of taken that over there. You obviously have a huge following that I've been a fan of yours for years. And one of my questions that I would like to ask you, that I ask a lot of folks, what kind of inspired you? What was that like moment, or in before you became like famous in regards to writing satire and a comedian? Like, what was that moment where you were like, oh, this is my calling? Like, this is what I was made and born to do. Like, what was there a moment in your life where you kind of discovered that and you were like, this is it. This is it right here.
It's weird. It's a good question. I think that we all have within ourselves a sense of what we really want to do, even if we're in denial of it for some time. I mean, I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, and my dad was a lawyer, and he was determined that I go to law school. And I was doing things like comedy and acting. And the way they sold law school to me was they said, you could go into entertainment law. It's just the same as being in entertainment. You get to present your case to the jury. It's very dramatic. And somehow this didn't really seem convincing because my dad, I just was observing that he was bringing home lots of papers all the time. It didn't look like much fun. But really through college, going into college, I thought, well, writing is a great pastime, but I'm going to have to go to law school because I was from this bourgeois professional class family, and that's what I'd been trained to do. But I got elected to the Harvard Lampoon, and I think that that really changed my way of looking at things because I think to do something as risky as going to entertainment, now it's like every parent's dream that their kids have a Netflix series. but back then it was really a very strange thing to do. I mean, it was really not what a lot of people were doing. And I think it was just having one or two role models who had graduated from the Lampoon who were writing for places like Saturday Night Live. It convinced me that, wait a minute, this is actually a profession. Like you could actually make a living doing this. This isn't, an invitation to starvation and poverty. And I will come out of this, Scott. I'm a very bourgeois person. I am not somebody who would do really well with, busking for, for $20 for my jokes. I wanted to raise a family. I wanted to do all those bourgeois things. So to me, it was kind of just knowing that you could actually make a living, be a happy, self-supporting person, but do something you love to do. Because I actually worked for a couple of summers for the law firm that my dad worked at, which was Jones Day, which, as you know, as a Democratic bigwig, you know that Jones Day is part of the axis of evil. Like they are very helpful to Trump, probably still are. And when I was working at Jones Day in these summer jobs, I was supposed to do factual research. The idea of me, doing factual research is funny in and of itself. But the first case I was put on was a case called the Chevy Mobile case, which was Jones Day was defending General Motors against a class action suit because some people who purchased Oldsmobile cars, which are in those days was more of a high-end GM car, had engine trouble, and they opened up their hood of their car and they found out that GM had been putting Chevrolet engines in Oldsmobile cars, which is not cool. It was really ripping off the customers. So naturally, Jones Day was on the side of the bad guys, General Motors. And that made me wonder if this would be really such a rewarding way to make a living. So when I got an opportunity coming out of college to go out to LA and work in comedy, I took it and I've never looked back. Really, I've been so lucky that I get to do what I want to do in life.
Yeah, it's amazing. You do have some pipes though, like you sing, I guess, or you've sang with what the Rock Bottom Remainders, is that right?
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that. I do, people don't think of me as a singer. That's one of my, um, I would say not one of my superpowers. But yes, Dave Barry has this great band called the Rock Bottom Remainders. It has all these huge authors in it, like Stephen King and Amy Tan. And a few years ago, I went down and I had a book out, so I did the Miami International Book Fair, and Dave is based down in Miami. So he had me sing a song, and he said, "What song do you want to sing?" And I said, I want to sing "I'm Not Your Stepping Stone" by the Monkees. And the reason why I selected that was because during a previous writers' strike, but still in LA, I was part of a rock band composed of unemployed writers who were all unemployed because we were on strike. And I quickly learned that "Stepping Stone" is a great song for a band that only knows like three chords. It's a great garage band song. So I sang "I'm Not Your Stepping Stone." It's kind of an angry protest song, which is not really how Mickey Dolenz delivered it. But the lyrics are very bitter. You know, when I first met you, girl, you didn't have no shoes. Now you're walking around like your front page news. Whoa, what a burn, Mickey. So it was really fun, and it's interesting you bring up singing because I'm doing a show in my hometown of Hanover, New Hampshire on April 20th to raise money for our local library here. And there will be some singing involved. I have to warn people who are coming, singing will happen. There's a really talented jazz singer named Grace Wallace who lives here, and she's going to be the entertainment. And I may be convinced to come out of retirement, sort of like Sinatra,
Yeah.
and do some singing. So we'll see what happens.
Well, we're gonna have to record that. I hope somebody gets their camera there. There's one thing I was curious about, and I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but let's say, have you ever written anything satirically that's become true before? Like, let's say if in 2012, 2011, you said Trump will be the next president, I would have thought that was satire. Like, is there anything that you wrote and you're like, oh my God, this is actually happening now a few years later?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I think Trump did change the calculus and the likelihood of that happening. And I think that's why I dispute people who think that Trump has been great for comedy. I think Trump's made comedy harder because it's hard to make fun of a clown. He is so clownish to begin with that if you can somehow get away into making that funnier than him, now, granted, he's also horrifying. So it's not just like ha ha ha. But I did find once Trump was elected that I would try to come up with some crazy thing that Trump would do. And then, within minutes, he would actually do it. And, it was really a problem because my news was no longer fake. It was just early. And that wasn't really my idea. I didn't want to be like Nostradamus and come out with something like 10 minutes before Trump did it. So I kind of changed my approach a little bit. And rather than try to outdo Trump, which is hard to do, I mean, I do attempt to do that sometimes, but rather than try to outdo Trump, I would try to take Trump's logic to its extreme and just work it out. I'll give you an example of that. Like Stormy Daniels, of course, is back in the news now because the hush money trial is about to kick off. But when that whole story emerged during his term in office, he deputized Michael Cohen to come out when Michael Cohen and he were still BFFs. He deputized Michael Cohen to say that, yes, they did pay Stormy Daniels $150,000, but it wasn't because Trump had had sex with her. They denied vehemently that Trump had sex with her. They said they paid her because they were afraid that she would come out and say that Trump had sex with her, and they wanted to keep that quiet. So I worked out the logic of this, and I thought, well, wait a minute. I also have not had sex with Donald Trump. So where's my $150,000? So I did a piece about like millions of Americans demanding for the money, because they hadn't had sex with Trump, and they could threaten to say that they had. And so that's the kind of thing where, honestly, if you just take Trump at his word and you just work out the logic, it's so absurd. I mean, the other great example to me was when he was meeting with Vladimir Putin in Helsinki, and Vladimir Putin said that he had had no involvement in messing with the 2016 election, and Trump was like, case closed, you know. That's it. And that was another example where it's like, you really think about it, it's like if a criminal says that he's innocent, you've got to drop all charges right out the bat because you've heard it from the horse's mouth. Got to be true. So what Trump says often is absurd and it doesn't hold up to even the slightest scrutiny, but it can be fun to play the role of sort of a very gullible journalist and really pay attention to what Trump's saying and act as though it's true. And then that leads to all kinds of ridiculous results. So that I enjoy that actually more than trying to outdo Trump, because that's almost impossible.
Yeah, no, I understand. I covered him for way too long. I saw everything that he had done. We renamed that summit the Treason Summit, and the quick story behind that is I stubbed my toe very early in the morning because I was tracking everything he was doing there, and it made me really upset. And I was like, oh man! And then I channeled that energy. I meditate every day. I channeled that energy straight into him, and it became one of the biggest trending hashtags during his presidency, which was Treason Summit. And then, of course, as always, the hashtag, which is just a hashtag trending #1 in the world at that time, then they started using those words in the media and also on TV.
Interesting. So it started with you. It started with you. It's also kind of interesting that you injured your foot as a result of Trump, because foot injuries have played a big role in his life as well. So there's sort of a harmonic convergence, Scott. I mean, I don't know. I'm not like all woo woo Marianne Williamson or anything, but that's kind of freaking me out a little bit.
Yeah, we are kindred souls. They did say that in I guess we had a clout score, and that was who knew the most about Trump, and I ranked higher than Melania at one point. It was pretty creepy. What are your thoughts on Trump once again being the Republican nominee? A nightmare scenario for a lot of people, but for the 2024 election cycle, even after 88 felonies from 4 ongoing court cases and 2 impeachments and everything that went wrong during COVID and the pandemic and yada yada, the list goes on. What are your thoughts on him being the nominee again?
Well, it's really interesting because, in recent history, you have to go back, I think, to the 1950s with Adlai Stevenson, where a party has renominated somebody who lost, because he lost in 52, didn't come close to Eisenhower. And he ran again in 56, got the nomination, did even worse. And believe it or not, he was sort of made a half-hearted attempt to run again in 1960. The Democrats at that point said, you know what, I think we're going to try this John F. Kennedy guy, and that worked out a little bit better. But in recent years, we've had an aversion in our country, and it's interesting because it relates to Trump. We've had an aversion to losers. Like, we don't like, there wasn't a big clamor for, even though Hillary Clinton won the popular vote, there wasn't a big clamor to bring her back in 2020. It was like, no, she lost. We kind of, we didn't, try to, reanimate Walter Mondale or Michael Dukakis. It was kind of like, no, one and done, So there was really been in recent years a sense that if you lose, that's your one time at bat, you don't get to run again. Trump has really defied this in kind of a historic way. Interestingly, because also Trump, one of his, biggest insults that he can lay on anybody is to call them a loser. And Trump is, he lost the popular vote twice. And yet still he persists. And I have some theories about that. I think, and this is not a fresh observation, this is based on my reading of people who are much smarter than I am, but we're not dealing with a political party anymore. We're dealing with a cult. And a cult or religion really ignores facts. I mean, cults are based on really transcending the facts and really valuing allegiance over any kind of critical thinking until it goes bad. I mean, when a cult goes bad, then suddenly everybody realizes, oh, wait a minute, we were conned and what a jerk. I mean, my wife and I are big fans of any documentary that has to do with the Nexium cult. I don't know if you saw any of those, but it was this crazy sex cult that was based out of Albany. takes a lot to get a cult going in Albany, I've got to say. To get people to come to Albany and join your cult is impressive. And Trump's running a cult, and he's, been successful at it. I do think, all bad things come to an end eventually, and I do think that when it does go bad, it's going to go really bad. But we're not there yet. And in the meantime, I think, like, Democrats, if I can wax serious for a moment, I think Democrats shouldn't spend a lot of time trying to convert members of the cult. I think that that's a fool's errand. I think that will drain a lot of energy and a lot of money that will go nowhere. I think we have two options that are better. One is to find people who kind of on the fence, but are not in the cult. Maybe they like Trump's tax cuts, but they're not so crazy about his record on women's reproductive rights. And those people who are kind of in that fence situation are worth our time and money. The other thing that is really important is just turnout for the people that are already Democrats and want Joe Biden to be president. If we had had better turnout in 2016, if all those Obama voters, like 1 million Obama voters or something, sat at home and didn't vote for Hillary, we wouldn't be in this mess today. I mean, Trump would just be hosting the latest iteration of The Apprentice. We'd be living in a much better world. So that's my feeling. It is a very historic moment we're in a bad way, that this guy who keeps losing has got the nomination. But wouldn't it be nice to put an end to it this time, once and for all? I think it's doable. I really do.
Absolutely. I've tried to deprogram Trumpers, and literally there's 10 different examples that we'll be releasing, and it's every single one of them except for 2 who are now obsessed with our show. And thank you very much for you 2 joining us and whatnot. But we every time I get to that conclusion where they admit, oh my gosh, Russia actually did this, and oh my gosh, like, he actually did all these different things and he's charged with this. But then there's this moment where they hook back and they're like, but what about, and it's just like, I've lost them. It's like a record player. They're back again, stuck. And we're still trying to investigate how that happens in the first place, especially with, like, all this violent and dangerous rhetoric that he has been spouting off, coupled with the promises of being a dictator only for a day, wink wink, only for a day. What do you make of this? I mean, words matter, as you know, and especially in politics. And he's just raising the level every day because he's not going to get as much coverage unless he's more salacious or crazy or whatever you want to call it. Like, what? How far do you think this violent rhetoric goes, and what do you make of him doing this, and the threats against the judges and families and whatnot? What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, it's one of those situations where I guess it's shocking but not surprising. We live in a very violent culture, and we have really since our nation's founding. We were founded on violence. Let's not forget. Like, it's not like we were settled by the Quakers. Let's put it that way. It's like the Quakers didn't come over here and just have a lot of friends meetings and folk songs. No, there was actual genocide that had to occur in order to seize all that land between here and California. So we have a violent culture. We have a gun culture. And it's interesting. I wrote this book, Profiles in Ignorance. Trump is not smart. Trump is very ignorant, poorly informed, stupid person. However, he's very talented, and there's a distinction. He's very instinctual. Like, at his best, when you see him, and we haven't seen him at his best for a while, by the way, because if you look at his rallies now, they're a shadow of their former self. It's like watching very late career George Foreman trying to land a punch. He doesn't have the timing. He's lost the acuity to the extent that he ever had it. He's not the Trump that people remember, both for good and for bad. And I actually think the more we get exposed to Trump, especially should there be a debate, people are going to be shocked at just how sort of old and feeble he is, actually. He's just not doing well. But Trump, peak Trump, if we go back to 2016, he could stand in front of an audience and really, like an improv performer, read the room really well. I mean, he could really hold the attention of those crowds for, an hour, 2 hours. I mean, it was insane. It was like, going to a Dead concert or something. He just kept playing. And so that's talent. It's not the same thing as intelligence or knowledge, but he is very good at reading the thirst for violence and the anger and the revenge, the desire for retribution, as he calls it, in his audience and playing off of that. So that's why I think it, continues to ramp up and why he does it somewhat successfully. And his followers, it's not that they accept it, it's like they really feed on it. They like it. That's the thing that liberals have taken a long time to figure out. They would always think like, how did people like Donald Trump in spite of how horrible he is? And that's not the question. And that's not what's going on. A lot of his followers like him because of how horrible he is. It's not like they're ignoring it and saying, well, I like his policies. They always say like, I like his policies. I sure wish he wouldn't always be so chaotic and crazy. That's a very disingenuous answer. A lot of his followers like the fact that he's angry, vengeful. He is giving voice to a lot of anger they have. And by the way, I think we ignore the anger at our peril. I mean, a lot of people are angry because they got a raw deal over the last couple of decades plus from the government, from the economy. And it's a kind of populist rage that I think some on the left, like Bernie Sanders, have successfully tapped into. But I think if we sort of ignore that and say, oh, that's just going to go away, or that's crazy Trumpies, I think we make a mistake. There's something legit happening. People were sent off to war, came back injured, or people lost the lives of young ones, loved ones, because of George W. Bush's, war in Iraq. And there's, the financial meltdown of 2008. People lost their homes, they lost their jobs. There are a lot of legitimate reasons for people to be upset and angry. But Trump is not offering legitimate solutions. It's up to the opposition to do so. And I think that's where, I'm loath to demonize Trump voters, although sometimes they're good topics for satire, they deserve it. But I'm loath to demonize them in total because I do think there's a lot of legitimate anger that he, in his talented way, has tapped into.
Yeah, it's tough to. I mean, I'll talk with some people a lot, and I try to talk to family members who were supporters of his, and it's difficult conversations because they get heated real quickly. But then I get to the root of it, and I just want to know like what policy, like specifically, like what policy has helped you. And it's just goes back to racism, sexism, and the anger. Like it just circles right back to that. Well, he's doing a lot for us. And then I find out from them, well, why are you such a traitor to our race? And I'm like, what are you talking? Like, where did you go? Where did you go, uncle? Like, what? No, this conversation is over.
Well, when there's economic rage too, otherizing people is a great solution. Scapegoat people. That goes back to Nazi Germany. Not to go to Nazis so quickly in our conversation, Scott, but one of us had to do it at some point. But it goes back before then. Like the whole way you start a war is by saying that other people are the source of all of our problems, and so we got to kill those guys. And that is happening all over the world. And Vladimir Putin is using it to prosecute his war in Ukraine. He's saying they're all Nazis. Now you see, he also likes to call people Nazis. So there you have it. But the other thing about this, if you look at it as a cult or as a religion, a lot of people have had a real hard time with the fact that Trump, who's been found liable for sexual abuse, for assaulting E. Jean Carroll in a department store, and has many credible allegations of sexual abuse by a couple of dozen women at least. I sort of lost count. People are baffled as to how you could have a guy like that be supported by so many evangelical Christians. And I actually am not, because, and this is, no knock on Christianity, which I think is, one of our great religions, but in terms of the way evangelical Christianity has risen in America, people who follow evangelical pastors are more accustomed to accepting hypocrisy than any of us. They've had more experience with it. Tammy, Faye Baker, and that the whole concept of a televangelist who turns out to be a philanderer or have any number of sexual skeletons in his closet. That's just comes with the territory, and you as a follower, as a member of his flock, are just expected to accept that and forgive him. So in a way, if you're in an evangelical setting, you have more experience with accepting these contradictions than somebody who is irreligious like me. I don't have like a rabbi who I'm like in awe of, I don't have any rabbi, but I don't have any rabbi who like I'm in awe of. And if I found out that he was like stealing from the temple or sleeping with somebody, with his secretary or something, that I would be horrified. So I lack the experience necessary to hold those two opposing ideas in my head simultaneously. Whereas a lot of evangelicals, that they've had the experience of, listening to and looking up to somebody who's a hypocrite. So Trump, there are thankfully a lot of Christians and evangelical Christians who hate Trump, and even though we're not supposed to hate people, but that's so it's not like all is lost. But I guess I have a somewhat easier time accepting the fact that he's done well with evangelicals than other people have dealt with that seemingly impossible situation.
This is a key question I had in my brain rattling around over the years. What kind of evolution has there been in what people find funny politically, and what do you think that says about where we are now as a country?
Well, I think taste changes. I think that the line that you cross has moved further and further and further, so you can kind of say anything now, and there's every now and then somebody could line they go too far. But I would say I quote, on my Substack, I have an about page where I talk a little bit about how I got into this racket and everything. And my favorite quote, which I quote there, is from Will Rogers, who's still kind of like he and Mark Twain are the icons of American political satire. No one's really, maybe Molly Ivins you put in that kind of holy trinity too, but no one's really surpassed those three. And he had a great quote, which he said, "There's no trick to being a humorist when you have the whole government working for you." And I think that remains the constant, which is that politics attracts extremely damaged people. I think that's why I like writing about it. It's not that I'm really that, even though I've been bloviating quite a bit, I don't consider myself a political junkie, and I certainly don't consider myself an expert. I'm not like, Heather Cox Richardson or somebody like that, who really is a historian and knows this stuff, and she deserves to be put on that pedestal. I'm just a clown who, reads headlines and makes fun of them. But I think what appeals to me about politics as a subject matter is the characters, because in order to go into politics, with few exceptions, you've got to have something terribly wrong with you. I really do. There's no way around that. It's just most of us are content to be voters, and some of us are content to be non-voters. But most of us don't want to be president of the United States. I think George Carlin said that the way we should vet our presidential candidates is that if somebody says they want to be president, they should be immediately disqualified. And I'm kind of with him on that. It attracts a very strange group of people. And as a comedian, it's pretty good to write about strange people as opposed to normal people. So I don't think really much has changed. I think taste changed. Certainly the delivery system has changed. And, Mark Twain, I think, would have been phenomenal on Twitter back when it was Twitter. I think a lot of people had like Mark Twain accounts where they just tweeted out quotes of his, and they were, timeless. They really didn't age at all. And a lot of the hyper topical stuff, like what I do, is going to age badly simply because people are going to wonder what the heck I was even talking about. But the Twain sort of would, I'm sure he made a lot of comments about politicians whom we don't remember. And so those things he said didn't age terribly well. But his general take on the human condition and on our politics is pretty eerily timeless. And so I don't know. I don't think it's changed that much, really. I think it's just, changed around the edges. But I think on the whole, if you say something that's really true, chances are it will be funny. If you say something that's untrue, it might get a laugh, but it might not be one of those deep belly laughs. It might be kind of like, So I think, but you don't, if you're writing every day the way I do, you're not going to nail some eternal truth about humanity on a daily basis. I wish I could, but that would be like a superpower.
Well, you got a fan here. And my last question for you, um, you have a great sense of humor still about everything. Even though you do slog through the mud, you do read the news, watch the news, you are on the front lines in regards to political debates and what's going on because you have to pay attention in regards to write the response to it or write about it. What advice do you have for our listeners for staying positive despite the constant onslaught of lies and attacks online and even in person?
Well, I have kind of a, interesting, or I guess maybe a take you wouldn't predict from somebody like me who's online as much as I am. So I would say get offline. Don't there's no reason to be paying attention to the news on a minute by minute or even hour by hour basis. You have to think to yourself like what is obtained from our consumption of the news. I mean, I have to do it to some extent because I'm making jokes about it. But if I didn't have my job, I think I might check in with the news in the morning just to sort of wake up. And then maybe later in the day, but I wouldn't be like constantly on my phone on a feed, constantly updating to see what's going on. I think all we need to know is sort of what is essential for staying alive, keeping our family and loved ones safe, and being a responsible citizen, knowing who to vote for, and following the kind of um, granular twists and turns of a political campaign really doesn't help you in those endeavors. So I'm actually telling people, even though I'm online, I'm telling people to get offline. So maybe I'm killing the golden goose here. But I think, all the evidence shows that the more we're on social media, the more we're on our phones, the unhappier we'll be. And if our goal is to be happy, and then happiness maybe leads to productivity and better relationships with the people that are important to us, not some troll, on X who's flaming somebody, then I think less news would be better. So that would be one piece of advice. So another piece of advice is if you're an activist or prone to be an activist and you want to make the world a better place. For example, you want to reelect President Biden because he believes in democracy. That's, I think, a viable and a good goal to have. If that's important to you, stop being an observer, stop being an audience member, be a participant. And there's a great book out there by this political scientist who teaches a Tufts named Eitan Hirsch called Politics is for Power. And he talks about how people have sort of stepped off the sidelines in their communities to do sort of incremental things to make the world a better place. And I quoted this in my book in the last chapter where I sort of talked about democracy having a braking system where we can prevent the worst from happening. And unfortunately, people in my town of Hanover took me at my word and they said, well, how would you like to run for the board of our library? And I thought, man, I do not work well with others. I am a really bad committee member. I hate going to meetings because I have so much contempt for other people's ideas. But I decided, you know what, I've really got to, I've got to follow through. If I said it in a book, I've got to do it. And I have done it. I can't say that I'm the best committee member in the world because I think my natural instinct is to be alone in a room doing stuff on my own, like just writing and being a solo guy. But I have learned that the only way to keep our democracy alive is by stop just being an observer and being a participant. So in my small way, I'm trying to do that. And the weird thing is it actually makes you feel better. It makes you feel not so helpless, not so victimized. It actually makes you feel engaged and like, maybe we're dreaming, but it makes you feel like, you're participating and moving that huge boulder just a nano inch. And I think that's a good thing. So those are my two advice. Get off your phones, get involved. How's that?
That's great. So make sure you visit borowitzreport.com. No, no, it is I recommend that all the time. Just to finish up, the green space, getting out, breathing nature, experiencing family. I you know, the whole job of a phone, I don't have notifications on my phone, so people can't actually reach me unless it's my wife. That's a different story. She gets notifications from, like, I get all that. But that way I choose to when to check my phone. I choose when to check my text messages and notifications. Otherwise, our phones, both of our phones would explode with notifications from social media and everywhere else. You know, choosing when to check it. I think that's really sage advice for everybody to listen to. And we've talked about that on my Substack of just getting out, drinking water, like doing the basics and making sure you take care of yourself. And, uh,
Yeah.
you know, that's
Exercise,
exactly.
exercise
And
even.
it's been, I've ran at least a mile a day every single day this year. So I'm
Good for you.
trying to go for it. But in all seriousness, folks, iconic legend. I know it's but like to me, an icon. And I know to a lot of you, Andy Borowitz. The uh, book will be in the episode notes, Profiles in Ignorance, and we'll also have a link to Borowitz report, which you do need to visit because it's actually one of the best Substack pages I've ever seen, and it's fun to read. I'm a paid subscriber. You should become one too. Thank you again for taking the time today. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Scott. This was really fun.